in a proposal that would be brought to a called General Conference in February of 2019. So they had almost 3 years to work on this. They were scholars, theologians, pastors, laity were appointed to this commission. And they met for, like I said, roughly 3 years. And they brought to St. Louis in 2019 a proposal. Now then, in between that, right after the 2016 General Conference, the Western jurisdiction elected Karen Oliveto as a bishop for the Western jurisdiction, all right? Karen Oliveto is married to a female United Methodist clergy person, okay? So that really brought into highlight, if it wasn't already highlighted, the struggles that we were facing as a denomination and as a church, okay? You should be aware that Karen Oliveto was elected bishop by a jurisdictional delegation. That's what bishops are elected at a jurisdictional conference. She was elected by a delegation of 25 votes. She needed 13 votes to become bishop, okay? Because your delegation is based upon your membership. If she had been running for bishop in the southeastern jurisdiction, which is where we are, she would have had 200 or thereabouts votes to become elected bishop. We are 10 times the size of the Western jurisdiction. It is a huge geographical area. If you look on a map, I mean, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, the mountain states, the West Coast, Alaska, Hawaii, Arizona, all that is part of the Western jurisdiction. Huge geographical area. They constitute 3%. 3% of the Methodists in the United States, okay? So you're talking about a really teeny, tiny group of folks relative to the church at large. And that doesn't mean they're unimportant. Don't get me wrong. Everyone's important. Everyone's a sacred work. But to put it in perspective, it's a fairly small number that was grabbing the attention. All right? So the commission and let me back up. There have been folks that have asked and complained, how could the church let that happen? Why didn't our bishops do something when she was elected as a bishop? Why didn't they stop it? Okay? You need to understand that in many ways, the Methodist Church is a lay clergy combination, and we have tons of due process, all right? I'm an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. It took 5 separate votes for me to be ordained an elder in the UMC. My local church, first off, had to vote and say, we think Dean would be a suitable candidate for ministry. They then handed me off to the district committee on ministry. And that body interviewed me, asked me some questions, did some paperwork, did some lessons for them. They then voted, Dean is a suitable candidate for ministry. They handed me off to the conference board of ministry. And that body then interviewed. I had to do a sermon, I had to do a Bible study, had to make presentations, had to answer theological questions, written answers that were submitted to the board of ministry, and then spent a day and night at Lakeshore being grilled by the board of ministry, if you would, all right? That body then voted, we think Dean would be a suitable candidate for ministry in the United Methodist Church. At that point, with their approval, I became a probationary member. And I had served a 3-year probationary period. That is where Donna is in the process right now. She's had 3 votes. She is during her 3-year probationary period. And then at the end of that 3-year probationary period, she will go back, and I went back to the board of ministry, answered a separate set of questions, did another sermon, did another Bible study, did another grilling of interview with all these folks, and they voted to approve me as a candidate for ministry in the United Methodist Church. And that then sent me to the executive session of the Memphis annual conference at that point, all right? And then the executive session had to vote, and I don't know if it's a 2/3 or 3/4, I forget what the vote tally actually is, but a significant majority has to say, we think Dean is acceptable. 5 bodies voted to approve me as a candidate for ministry. And then the bishop laid hands on me, and I was ordained, right? The bishop does not have the authority to overturn those 5 votes, all right? Those 5 different votes by different bodies within the church. And it is ironic to a certain degree that people are complaining that the folks in the Western jurisdiction were not abiding by the discipline, and to fix that problem, they are asking our bishops not to abide by the discipline and overturn it. You see the irony there? The irony goes a little bit further. Why are we divided into jurisdictions in the first place in the United States? There are 5 jurisdictions: South Central, Northeastern, Great Plains, Texas, Central Texas, whatever, in the West. There are 5 different jurisdictions, all right? The reason is very simple. In 1939, when the Northern Methodist Church and the Southern branch of Methodism rejoined after the Civil War, we folks, primarily in the South, said, we do not want those blankety-blank Yankees electing our bishops for us. Got it? In other words, we don't want the Northerners to elect a black bishop and send him or her to us. That's just historical reality. So as a result, folks out west can't tell us who our bishop's going to be, and we here in the South, we don't get to tell the folks out west who their bishop's going to be. All right? That's just the reality. We oftentimes do indeed reap what we sow. Okay? That just highlighted everything. So at 2019, there was a lot of anticipation about what was going to happen. The Commission on a Way Forward, they presented a proposal that in essence said, we want every church simply to have the right to decide. All right? The conventional wisdom was, the lingo was the one church plan. We will be one church, but every congregation can decide. If Bartlett wants to accept a gay pastor from the bishop, they may decide to do so, or they may say to the bishop, no, we don't want a gay pastor sent here. If Bartlett wanted to host a gay wedding, they would have the right to decide that, or they could decide, no, we're not going to host a gay wedding here. That was the proposal to allow us to move past this constant battle at General Conference. That was the proposal from the Commission on the Way Forward, presented in St. Louis, February 2019. That proposal was rejected by the General Conference in St. Louis. And instead, they adopted what, for again, I'm not fond of labels, but for lack of a better term, they adopted a traditional proposal that maintained all of the language which I've already shared with you, and they also added that if a candidate were to marry a same-sex marriage, that would count as a admission of self-avowed practicing homosexual. They also toughened the penalties that could be imposed upon those who violated the discipline. They made it harder. In other words, we became a more conservative denomination, if you would. Again, don't like the labels, but that's where we are. And they added a paragraph to the discipline. As what the folks who put it forth, I think, were trying to offer an act of grace. They established a paragraph in the discipline that said, for those congregations that cannot abide by our traditionalist language, we want to give you a way to leave the United Methodist Church, and we will even give you a way to take your property with you. Because who owns the property here at Bartlett? The Tennessee Western Kentucky Annual Conference owns the building and the property. We have in the UMC, and have since the very beginning, what is known as a trust clause. We hold the property in trust for the conference. That has been our operating procedure since the very beginning. They wanted to give away for churches that couldn't abide by this, that were just so fed up that wanted to leave. We wanted to give them a graceful way to leave. And so, paragraph 2553, I think it is, I never can remember the number, says that if a congregation at a called church conference, a church conference is where every professing member of the congregation has a vote, right? At a duly called church conference, if 2/3 of the voting professing members present vote to disaffiliate, and that church pays basically 2 years of its apportionments, and that church pays any unfunded pension liability, that church may then leave the United Methodist Church with the building and property. Okay? And that called church conference has to have a 120-day notice. All right? After a church votes, if they should vote to disaffiliate, that disaffiliation vote has to be ratified by the annual conference. But honestly, that is a mere formality, okay? And in particular for us, Bishop McAlilly has made it abundantly clear he has no desire to try to force a congregation that does not want to be a UMC congregation anymore. He has no desire to force that congregation to stay in the UMC, all right? Because we are Wesleyan and we are a connectional church, we are not that kind of church where when I preach a lousy sermon on Sunday, a group of folks get together on the parking lot and say, we need to get rid of this guy, we need to get out of the Methodist Church, we're going to leave. We've never been that kind of denomination. That paragraph that allows the church to disaffiliate under those conditions expires December 31st of this year. Okay? Therefore, Bishop McAlilly has called for 2 special sessions of the annual conference that would meet. One would meet in May, and the other one, which is the one really germane to us, would be November 13th of this year. In order to disaffiliate, we would have to have met those 3 conditions. We would have to fill out all the paperwork, the legal paperwork. We would have to have the money. All of that would have to be turned in by October 2nd of this year. That is sort of the hard and fast deadline we as Bartlett United Methodist Church as a congregation are facing. So that means that basically by the end of May, early June at the absolute latest, if we're going to have a vote, it has to be called for by then, all right, to give the 120-day notice. All right. What happened, and I'm a little bit speculating, but instead of the progressive or liberal churches leaving, what we tended to see is the more conservative churches had enough. They saw the actions of the Western jurisdiction as just a thumb in our eye and said, it's not going to change. The liberals made it clear they weren't going anywhere. They were content with a big tent. And so many of our conservative brothers and sisters said, then we will take advantage of this paragraph and we will leave. The clearest evidence of that would simply be here in Memphis. Does anyone here think that Christ Church is a liberal congregation? Okay, you see what I'm getting at? Okay, so that is what we have seen repeatedly across the country, is that churches that lean more conservative are the ones that tend to be leaving. all right? Not all of them, but most of them at this point. We also know that denominations aren't exactly thriving in this country to begin with. And I strongly suspect that many of the churches that have left and will leave, they are not going to join a new denomination. I can't speak for that. I don't know what we would do if we were to disaffiliate, whether we would want to join another denomination or become an independent congregation ourselves. I have no idea. But I suspect that many of those churches that have left will not be joining the GMC. We also know that last year we approved 57, I think it was, congregations out of 900 plus churches in the Tennessee Western Kentucky Conference. That is all of Middle Tennessee, all of West Tennessee, and the 8 far western counties of Kentucky. Out of those 900-something plus churches, 57 voted to disaffiliate, and they were approved at annual conference last year. Now, we know there will be more that are in the process, Christ Church being the clear example, that are disaffiliated. Last year, those 57 churches represented a total of 6% of all of our congregations, all right? And they gave 3% of the annual conference's budget. In other words, the churches that have left, for the most part, have been smaller, rural congregations. All right? That's just an observation. Christ Church obviously doesn't fall into that category, all right? But I can tell you that one congregation had a unanimous vote. You know, I said you never get a unanimous vote. You couldn't get a unanimous vote that it's nighttime right now, okay? But one congregation voted unanimously that they wanted to leave the United Methodist Church. All 5 people voted to leave. I was their pastor in the early 90s, and I can state with utter confidence that congregation has never, ever been a United Methodist congregation. They've had the cross and flame on their sign, but that's as close to Methodism as they ever came. I love the folks, don't get me wrong, love the folks, but they weren't Wesleyan, never were, all right? And that has been, a lot of the congregations that have left, I make the case that they were primarily Methodist in name, more so than in practice. All right? And I will also say that, yes, Christ Church leaving, and folks, Christ Church is a wonderful congregation, does a tremendous ministry in this community, does a great deal for the kingdom, all right? Love that church and the people there. Don't hear me putting them down. But I said no, that they gave, the churches that have left gave 3%. Well, huge church like Christ Church, well, that's going to increase that 3% of the conference budget that's not going to be there, right? No, because Christ Church, for the past couple of decades, has not been paying apportionments in full to begin with. And they have been paying, in some instances, just the bare minimum to maintain their clergy affiliations. All right, insurance, pensions, that kind of stuff. So, and the conference, to be quite honest, has been preparing for Christ Church's departure for a long time. It is no great surprise, all right? But the vote at Christ Church was over 90%. They clearly were ready to go, and they were of pretty much one mind. I have shared every class that I've been in. If we've got 90+% of folks here at Bartlett that want to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church, then we need to vote, and we need to do that. But if we are not at that kind of margin, I will tell the church council and I will tell this congregation, we need to think long and hard. Because the absolute worst thing in my mind that could happen to us would be to have a 70-30 split or, heaven forbid, a 60-40 split. Where you've got 60% of the folks wanting to leave and 40% of the folks holding them back. I am not changing the requirements. A 2/3 vote is what is required. But if we vote 60-40 or 70-30, I don't see how we can possibly be the strongest mission station for Jesus in 10 years. because we will absolutely have devastated ourselves now. The example that I have used is that a good lawyer never asks a question that he or she does not know the answer to. And if we are not very confident in what a vote would be here at Bartlett, I think we should be very reluctant to call for such a vote. Again, I'm not changing the standard, all right? But I just think, again, what is our goal? It's not to be a UMC or a GMC or an independent. It's to be the strongest mission station for Jesus that we can be. That is my goal as your pastor, all right? I've told folks, the bishop did not send me to Bartlett to keep you in the United Methodist Church. He certainly did not send me here to lead you out of the United Methodist Church. Donna and I are appointed really not to this congregation, but to this community to be the strongest mission station for Jesus that we can be. That is our goal, all right? How we handle the question makes a difference. We also, we're to the point now. John, if you could, go to the next slide. Remember, this is what we know, all right? This is a comparison of the United Methodist Church's teaching on the authority of Scripture, the Methodist Church's teaching on the authority of that. But the one on the left is the UMC. We hold that everything necessary for salvation can be found in the Old and New Testament. Everything necessary and sufficient is found in the Old and New Testament. In that, with the Holy Spirit, the Scriptures are our guide for faith and practice. You may have heard the night the bishop did the Bible study here, he made some offhanded comment, half joking, that yes, he does believe in the Bible. Because there has been a campaign, an intentional campaign by some within the church to say that Methodists don't believe in the Bible, we don't do this, we don't believe, blah, 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 blah. We do. We hold Scripture as primary. John Wesley was known for saying he is a man of one book, and that one book was the Bible, all right? So don't let anyone tell you that this is about the authority of Scripture, that we don't take it seriously. We do. Others have said, well, you don't believe in the divinity of Jesus. Next slide, please, John. Paragraph 104 and paragraph 106 of the Global Methodist Church say the exact same thing, all right? The exact same thing. We believe in the divinity of Jesus. It is from our Articles of Religion, handed down from John Wesley, taken almost verbatim from the Church of England. That's the teaching of the United Methodist Church. It's the teaching of the Global Methodist Church. The bodily resurrection of Jesus. Next screen, please, John. Yes, again, the paragraphs are cited there. The exact same wording in the United Methodist Church and in the Global Methodist Church. So there had this disinformation, I guess would be the way to phrase it, has been quite prominent in the church. Next screen, please. Can an LGBT person become a pastor? In both the UMC and the GMC, the answer to that is no. Unless, again, they, as long as they could become a pastor if they were not a self-avowed practicing homosexual. If you're not a practicing homosexual, you could be a pastor in the UMC or you could be a pastor in the GMC. The two denominations are teaching the same thing on that particular point, all right? And can a person who is in a same-sex relationship get married in the United Methodist Church? No, and they can't get married in the Global Methodist Church. All right, next one, yeah. As I told you at the very beginning, this has been our teaching for 50 years, all right? And it remains our teaching today. Nothing has changed in that regard in our book of discipline. I will share and last one, can a pastor officiate at a same-sex wedding? No, we can't. Right? I did have my district superintendent in the purchase area in Western Kentucky shared that part of the disaffiliation process is you have to state that you have three choices about why you want to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. The first one is theological differences. And Nancy Varden, my district superintendent, said that's what many of the churches up in the Paducah area were checking. We disagree theologically with the United Methodist Church. And she would say, really? What part of this are you disagreeing with? And they would say, oh, but now we've heard that we've got gay pastors and that we're having gay weddings and that our bishops don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus. No, all of that is false. Not everything you read on the internet is true. Okay? I will say that this disinformation campaign, whether intentional or not, and in some instances it has clearly been intentional, has wreaked havoc to the point that in North Georgia, the North Georgia Conference, the bishop there has suspended the disaffiliation process because there has been so many lies told to churches and to church members that he says it is not a fair process for people to vote to leave based upon the lies they have been told. Okay? So, next slide is what nobody knows. All right? We do know, good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, and we don't have another pandemic, there will be a general conference in 2024 in Charlotte, North Carolina. That is, and I say general conference, that is a meeting of the church, the worldwide United Methodist Church. There will be delegates from Asia, Europe, Africa, South America, all right? And at every general conference, everything is on the table, all right? No one can tell you what is going to be the outcome of that general conference. The gracious person in me says that anyone that thinks they do know and tells you they know what is going to happen, the gracious side of me says they are delusional. The less than gracious side of me says they are lying to your face. We simply do not know. Even the bean counters and the head counters and the folks that keep a close touch on the pulse of the church, and I am not one of those folks, even those folks, for the most part, are willing to admit we don't know what will happen in 2024. We do know that in 2019, the traditionalists, again, I don't like the phrasing, but the traditionalist side won. The vote was 53% to 47%. All right? Not a huge split, but enough to win an election, right? Okay. We do know that the African delegation will be even larger at the 2024 General Conference. And the assumption is that the African delegation is quite traditional in its theology. All right? However, we also do know for a fact 6 of the African bishops have told the Global Methodist Church to leave their congregations alone, that they are not welcome in their congregations because of the disinformation they see being perpetrated by certain segments within the GMC. Okay? We also know that the African church, the United Methodists in Africa, they value the cross and flame logo, that emblem. That logo carries a lot of weight in Africa at large. It is a very well-respected brand, if you would. And the we are thinking, the assumption is that the African churches, for the most part, do not want to leave the UMC because the cross and flame stays with the United Methodist Church. All right? So I do want to point out that that does trigger another thought. If we voted tonight to leave the United Methodist Church and we took down the cross and flame, do you think there's anyone in this community that is something to say, hey, they have got rid of the cross and flame, those liberals are gone, let's go to Barton Methodist Church? Do you think that's going to happen? No. Likewise, if I told Eddie to run up the rainbow flag tomorrow, do you think we're going to have a bunch of folks in Barton that say, ooh, a progressive church, let's go there? No. It's not going to happen. As Bishop McAlely shared in a meeting on Monday after he had did the Bible study, you are talking about teeny, tiny numbers. And I will assert, my belief is, I don't know this for a fact, but my belief is that much of the progressive folks have already written the United Methodist Church off, all right? Our gay sisters and brothers have already given up on the Methodist Church for the most part. They're not coming back, all right? And I will also say that in 10 years, this is going to be an even less of an issue than it is now in the society at large. The country, the culture is moving on. But now, the church, we tend to lag a good 10, 20, 100 years behind the culture at large, okay? So, we don't know what's going to happen in 2024. That General Conference could revive the paragraph on disaffiliation, allowing churches to leave with 2/3 vote, 2 years apportionments, unfunded liability paid. They could make leaving easier for congregations. They could make it harder for congregations. We don't know. I talked about the African delegation being traditional. In 2020, American United Methodist ceased being the majority of the church. There are now more United Methodists outside of this country than there are inside the country. And representation at General Conference is based on your membership. So if it's not going to happen in 2024, because 2024 technically is the 2020 General Conference that didn't happen because of COVID, if it doesn't happen in 2024, in 2028 for sure, the delegations from outside the U.S. will be more than the delegations from in the U.S. All right? So, but we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen at that General Conference. We don't know if you are a delegate to General Conference elected from Christ Church here in Memphis. Now that Christ Church is disaffiliated, are you still a delegate to the General Conference even though you are no longer a member of the United Methodist Church? The Judicial Council hasn't ruled on that yet. We don't know. All right? It is impossible for anyone to say with any confidence or certainty what that General Conference is going to do. All right? So, last category is what we think we know, what we assume we might know. We assume the African delegation is going to remain conservative theologically. We don't know if they will choose to remain in the UMC and whether they would at some point say, well, we'll let each area sort of decide for themselves, whether they might sort of free the United States Church, the American Church, to have some variations in the Book of Discipline that would not apply to them. There is already some variation. The Book of Discipline does allow for cultural context, all right? In the African church, bigamy is still a part of the culture. And so their Book of Discipline sort of allows, makes accommodations for that, okay? Whether or not that might then be case for the American church would have a slightly altered book of discipline that might be more progressive, and the African church a more traditional book of discipline. We don't know. It is pure speculation, and John Wesley warned against speculation. All right. What I do know with a fair degree of confidence is that no one knows what is best for Bartlett, for this church, better than the people of Bartlett, of this church, right? Therefore, I have made the decision. We will not have any outside voices coming in to advocate one way or the other, all right? I have told David Weatherly, our district superintendent, he is not welcome in this church to speak on that particular issue, all right? Because David has a point of view, and I'm not saying I don't know theologically where David is on human sexuality, whether he's conservative, moderate, liberal, whatever. But David, his goal is to keep Bartlett in the United Methodist Church. I don't know if that's the best thing for us, again, 10 years down the road. Some of you, I know many of you have probably seen Dr. Renfro's book, Are We Really Better Together, or something along those lines. And I was asked, no, maybe we should be studying this book. Dr. Renfro has been pastor for over 30 years at the Woodlands Church in Texas, or he's been on the pastoral staff there. They voted, again, 90+%, 3,000 folks, 90+% to leave the United Methodist Church. Dr. Renfro has been a part of the Good News Movement, the Wesleyan Covenant Association, and now the GMC. All right. He clearly wants us to leave the United Methodist Church. But Dr. Renfro has never been here. He can't possibly know better than you and I what is best for this congregation. And for that reason, we will not have any outside voices coming in. Okay? Now that I cannot prohibit a Sunday school class or a UMW or UWF circle, whatever, from having someone in, but I do control the pulpit. That is one of the few areas that a pastor does have pretty much absolute control. And we will not have outside voices advocating one way or the other. We know better than anyone else what is best. Okay? I have shared, and this is not so that, we'll keep Dean because we like what he's saying. I have shared that as long as I am your pastor, we will not have a gay wedding in this sanctuary, for the simple fact that it would tear this church apart. It would defeat my goal of us being the strongest church in 10 years that we could possibly be. Okay? So, that's just, I'm putting that out there. As long as I'm your pastor. That's not I'm not trying to blackmail you to keeping me, okay? But as long as I'm the pastor, there'll be no gay weddings here, because it is not in the best interest of this congregation as a whole, being a mission station for Jesus. All right? Questions? Yes, Tim. Mm-hmm. I know I can give you couple of examples that I know of. When Christ Church left here, that sort of that made the evening news, made the 6 o'clock news, right? The same thing happened this last spring in the Purchase area of Western Kentucky when Benton First, a sizable church, not as large as us by any means, but probably 150 or so on Sunday morning, when they voted to disaffiliate, that made the Channel 6 news in Paducah. Their pastor, Leah Howe, they signed her to a 3-year contract. She will be their pastor. She surrendered her credentials as a United Methodist clergy person, and she will be their pastor for the next 3 years. Interestingly enough, her husband is a United Methodist local pastor, all right? And one of his congregations at Puryear, in my home community of Henry County, They voted to disaffiliate. Steve is still a United Methodist clergy person serving Mason's Chapel and another church in Callaway County outside of Murray. So there is a family. She is no longer United Methodist. He remains a local pastor in the UMC. All right. If Bartlett were to leave, then Donna and I would have to make a decision whether we wanted to surrender our credentials and remain, and Bartlett would have to decide whether you even wanted us to remain. Okay, that would be at that point would be for y'all to decide. I do know. I think I know my understanding. Donna and I were talking about this earlier. Some of you probably have friends out at Collierville. My understanding, and this is not fact, I don't know this, but is that they are preparing to vote on the 26th of this month, and that their senior pastor has already said he will be joining the GMC, and their associate pastor has made it plain that she will remain in the UMC. So, clergy will have to decide. All right. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. There is, if someone violates the discipline, they're what we call chargeable offenses. Okay. If someone is charged for violating the discipline, there is a due process that is very detailed, that if resolution cannot be reached, there would then therefore be a church trial. And if found guilty, that clergy person would suffer punishment ranging from don't do it again to suspension to losing their credentials. All right. If a jury finds Alan, we're going to pick on Alan, all right? Alan down here, he made the mistake of sitting at the front. Alan goes down to the Dollar General store and he robs it. He's got a name tag on, Alan Higdon. He's on the security cameras. He robbed the store, all right? Saw it, no doubt about it. But, Alan's a pretty good guy. I sort of like Alan. And I'm sitting on Alan's jury, and I say, it wasn't that bad. And the jury finds him not guilty. Does the judge have the power to say, Alan, you're guilty, I'm throwing you in jail anyway? Does the judge have that authority? No. That is what is happening in the Western jurisdiction, Marshall. Violations are occurring. The due process is being followed. The trial courts, the juries are not finding the person guilty. Okay? You can't make someone on a jury vote the way you think they should vote. You can't do it. All right? And the bishops don't have the authority to then say, I'm going to find you guilty anyway. All right? So that's what's happening. The charges are being filed, Marshall, but the juries are not convicting. Bishop McAlilly has been our bishop for 11 years. In that time, there has not been a gay wedding within the Tennessee Western Kentucky Annual Conference. I can state with quite a bit of confidence there has probably never been a gay wedding held in a congregation of this annual conference. There has been one clergy person who held a same-sex wedding, officiated a same-sex wedding. Charges were filed. She was convicted, and she was suspended, with the suspension significant enough to bear financial hardship or financial pain. It cost her some money, okay? One case out of 11 years that he has had to deal with. He has made it abundantly clear. He will abide by the discipline. If anyone violates the discipline, he will follow due process, and charges will proceed, all right? So, yes? The church council has to call for a vote. That's where the process begins. So, yes, Jim. you're technically not out of the denomination. Technically, Christ Church is still a part of the UMC because the annual conference has not affirmed their vote. We will do that in May, all right? We will do that in May. But for all intents and purposes, they are gone, all right? So it wouldn't be instantaneous, but... And yes, you've got to pay up your money, of course. If anyone is curious, our apportionments for the past couple of years have run around $125,000, $130,000 each year. For what it's worth, we only paid 54% of those last year, so we need to work on that. But so you're looking for Bartlett to leave. The baseline would be $250,000, plus whatever the unfunded pension liability would be. And Lord knows I'm just a simple preacher. I have no idea about pensions and all that stuff. I don't, that is a foreign language to me. But it would be financially, it would be a significant amount. Yes, Bo. Okay. Over in Arkansas, all right, first of all, I will say right now, I cannot speak with any knowledge at all to that. I do know that our congregation, the United Methodist Church at Union City, they did not want to follow that paragraph. They said, by golly, we built this church, we paid for it, we should be able to leave and take it with us. And they filed a civil action in the courts. The judge politely said he was not about to get involved in a church matter and that the discipline held and they could not simply walk away and take the building with them. So they wound up paying 2 years' worth of apportionments, the unfunded liability, and the legal expenses for the annual conference. In other words, if they had just done what the discipline said, they would have come out financially better. But now they thought they knew better. I will share this again. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you've got someone with deep enough pockets, you can have that happen. But now I will point out, as a pastor, you should be worried if one person has that much power. You really should. That is rarely a healthy sign for a congregation. I will say that in Texas, in a particular county in the Dallas area, metro area, there are a couple of judges that have told churches that have filed in his or her court, and he has said, y'all go and take the building with you. But for historically, that trust clause has been upheld in the court system. But now, you might find a judge who would let you go without it, without the financial repercussion. Because you understand, the law is written, but the law only means what that judge says it means, right? So you might find a judge here locally that would say we can go, but now I wouldn't count on it. So, other questions? Yes. Thank you. I will share that for as long as this church has existed, people have sat side by side in the pews on Sunday morning without total agreement on positions of doctrine and theology. And you've managed just fine. I asked this question at my church in Paducah before I came here, and I'll ask it of you now. This debate has been roiling the UMC for the last 50 years. Is there anything that Bartlett, this congregation, has not done because of demonstrations at General Conference, because of caucus groups advocating one way or the other? Is there anything that we as a congregation have not done because of the debate that has been taking place? All right? And I'll ask this one. In the next 10 years, is there anything we would or would not do based upon the name on our sign? You know, we can be a great church. We can be a great church if we treat one another with the love and grace that we are called to. Historically, local congregations, local churches don't lose people because of theology. They lose people because we don't treat one another with love. All right? How we treat one another will have a greater impact than any theological point, I think. Anyone else? Yes, Alan.
I know there's a lot of churches in the area that
Mm-hmm.
this affiliation, and this is quite some time, and publicly want to thank you for our church and directed to this church.
I appreciate y'all coming out. I started with the Sunday school classes because I knew that was, I needed to be able to break us up into small groups. I didn't want to start with a mass congregational gathering because it's hard to have very much discussion. Like I said, I have done this with every adult Sunday school class. I've done it with the staff. I will do it with the youth sometime in March. But I think this has been sort of the best way to go. I also made the point, if you were here Sunday, the church council meeting is this coming Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock. We meet in the chapel. Every church council meeting is open to anyone who wants to attend. Always has been the case. Okay, but in particular, if you've got something you want to say and share, you are invited and welcome to come. Sandy Allen is the chair of the church council. She has been with probably at, I think, 8 out of the 11 or 9 out of the 11. She and Randy dared to take 2 weeks off to go to, did you go to Florida or something? Yeah, had the gall to go to Florida rather than go to a Sunday school class to listen to me. But she has been at all of these gatherings, listening, hearing, getting feedback. And I do know that some folks have shared with her, have called, talked, she's heard. But this will be on the agenda. I will share what I've heard, what I've done, and then the council may or may not make some kind of decision Sunday. All right? So I will share, and I will warn the council, and the point was made, we will publicize. Your church council is public knowledge. Now, whether or not you paid attention to it or not, that's on you, okay? But we will publish in the bulletin a list of everyone who is a member of the church council, if folks feel a need to reach out and talk to them. So, but I mean, it's public knowledge because y'all elected them. Yes, Fred.
So will the church council actually, that may be a potential item on the agenda, whether or not to vote to do the study or what?
I will simply bring my report that I have met with all these groups. This is sort of what I've heard, and whether someone calls from, whether a motion is made to call for a vote, I have no idea. God bless Robert's Rules of Orders. We will follow them. All right? So, I'm speculating, so I'll avoid the speculation. Other questions? If you have any questions or concerns, do not hesitate to come to me and ask. And like I said, I will give you the best informed answer that I can give. And if it's an I don't know, it will be I don't know. All right? So, and do pray for Bartlett and for all of these congregations that know some that are and some that aren't dealing with this, struggling with the issue. I can tell you, like I said, Collierville, I understand, is voting at the end of the month. Germantown said they're not going to take a vote. Covenant, St. Paul's, Colonial Park, they're not going to take a vote. They've already made that decision. They're moving on. So we don't have to take a vote. That is the critical thing people need to realize. No vote has to be taken. And you need to understand that if a vote does wind up being called for, you're not voting on human sexuality. You are not voting on human sexuality at all. You are voting on whether you want to remain in the United Methodist Church as a congregation of the UMC. And I will quote, I'll quote him. It's public knowledge. It's on Facebook. If you're friends with Harry Durbin, Harry was the pastor at Collierville for many, many years. He was a candidate from this annual conference for bishop. He did post on Facebook this week, and he's biased. He is biased. He wants Collierville to stay in the UMC, all right? So I want to state that up front. But he did make a good point. He said, for him, you need to understand, voting is not voting about human sexuality. It's voting on whether or not you can sit next to someone who disagrees with you. I thought that was a powerful statement. So, but like I said, now, he is biased. He's advocating. But I do think that there is something to be said for what the point he's making. Can we sit next to someone whom we've disagreed with for the last 40 years? Can we sit together with them after we know that we disagree with them? So, anyone else? So, all right.
Dean, could I mention?
Sure, Sandy.
And if I call your name, you might want to, raise your hand. But I'll give you the list of names of church council, and there's some of the members here today. If you have any comments for them, I've been getting comments after going to Sunday school classes, because we really should discuss what the church and the members have told us or have come up to. Dave Dunn, Dean and Donna. I understand Dean says that if it came to a vote of whether to vote or not, that he and Donna would probably not vote.
I've never voted on anything at a church council meeting. I don't vote. I do have one, but I will not vote.
Debbie Young, Harold Stevenson, Jack Coleman, Rebecca, Jay Estes, Janet Weems, Rachel Hasty, Ross Hamilton, Sandy Dunn, Rebecca Jacobs, Sue Griffith, Shannon Park, and Teresa Winter.
You through? The slides that John did for us, and thank you, John, thank you, Lane, for running the sound booth for us. They came from this chart, comparison chart, but the print is so teeny tiny that the Sunday school classes did not find it helpful. However, I do have a dozen or so copies. If you want to come and your eyesight is better than mine and you want to try to decipher this, you are more than welcome to take this, and it goes simply side by side the teachings of the UMC and the teachings of the GMC. And do be aware, the GMC is a new denomination as of May 1st last year. But you have to understand that everything I have been quoting from them comes from a quote-unquote transitional council, which really is nothing more than a group of folks who have gotten together and declared themselves a council for a new denomination. They have not been elected by anyone. They have appointed themselves, and they have prepared the documents that I've cited tonight. They have not been approved by any formal body of the Christian family. You're talking less than 100 folks that have done all this, that have put all this together. So who knows what, when they actually do meet as a general conference, what they will finally decide. Again, no one knows. But it's a fairly small group that has put all this together. But this is where this is the stand they are taking. All right? Jim Knight, would you close us in prayer?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for being with us this evening. Help us be very wise in our decisions.
All right. Everyone stay safe. Hope the storms miss us.